All right, welcome to another deep dive. You guys have given us some really fascinating YouTube videos about modern-day Saudi Arabia this time.
Yeah.
And we're going to, I think, go a little deeper than those typical headlines that we always see about, MBS and his reforms.
Absolutely.
And really look at what's going on the ground.
It's about understanding those complexities and contradictions, right? We've got these documentaries, we've got news segments, we've even got some glimpses into daily life to really understand how all of these reforms are actually playing out.
Yeah, and this isn't just about understanding, like, a faraway country.
Yeah.
Right? This is about really understanding Saudi Arabia's role in the Middle East, their relationship with the West.
Absolutely.
Their influence within the Muslim world. All of these things have ripple effects that go way beyond Saudi Arabia's borders.
Global impact. It's about unpacking those ripple effects so that you, the listener, can start to form a more informed opinion about this really fascinating country.
Yeah, it's a country that's really changing.
Evolving.
That's a good word, evolving, right.
Yeah.
So to start, one of the documentaries we were given kind of focuses on Saudi Arabia's push to attract tourists.
Yeah.
They're really highlighting these hidden treasures that most of us don't even know about.
Right.
Like the ancient city of Madain Salah, which is
incredible.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that it was traditionally off limits to Muslims.
Because of those religious beliefs surrounding the site. So opening it up to tourism, I mean, of course, there's the economic aspect of it, right?
Right.
Diversifying away from oil, which is a big driving force.
Sure.
But it's also a strategic shift by the government.
Right.
You know, potentially alienating some of those conservative elements while aiming for that broader global appeal. And in doing so, they're reinterpreting their own history and culture.
For a whole new audience, yeah.
Absolutely.
It really makes you think, is this a genuine attempt to open up, or is this a really calculated move to change their image?
Yeah, and especially when you consider the young population in Saudi Arabia who are actively pushing for these, more social freedoms.
Right.
So 70% of the population is under 30.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, huge. And one of the documentaries features this group of young motorcyclists, and it's amazing to see them speak out.
Really?
Even with government minders present.
Oh, wow.
And they're clearly risking quite a bit
Yeah.
to be able to share their views.
And you can feel that tension, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Between this desire for greater freedom.
Yes.
And then these very real limits on what you can actually say and do.
Yes.
You can feel it in the way they're talking about things.
And that brings up this concept of controlled freedom that we see woven throughout all these videos, right?
Interesting.
Like, take, for instance, the satirical YouTube show, Massamir.
Oh, yeah.
Their skits critique the system, even the religious police, but they never, ever directly criticize the royal family or MBS.
So it's like they're testing the boundaries.
They are, yeah.
Yeah.
They're pushing just enough, but they're always very aware of those red lines.
Yeah, and those red lines are still very real.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, even with all of MBS's reforms,
right.
The religious police might be curtailed, but there are still consequences.
Absolutely.
For speaking out against the family.
The royal family.
It's a tricky thing.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of this story of Farah, this young woman featured in one of the documentaries.
Okay.
She's so excited about the lifting of the driving ban.
Right.
But at the same time, she's incredibly anxious.
Yeah, well, she really embodies those contradictions, doesn't she? She's tasted this freedom, but she's still walking on eggshells.
Right.
And, the arrest of those women activists who pushed for the driving ban.
Right.
That really shows just how quickly things can change.
It's that chilling reminder that there's progress.
Yes.
But the consequences are real.
Absolutely. And it makes you question the depth and sincerity of these reforms, right? I mean, are they about genuine societal transformation, or are they just about maintaining the power of the ruling elite?
Yeah, it's a question that keeps coming up.
It does.
And it leads us to this topic that we can't really avoid.
Right.
Which is the murder of Jamal Khashoggi.
Yes.
These documentaries, they don't shy away from showing how that event really impacted the world's perception.
Of course not.
Of MBS and his reforms.
It's a turning point, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you have a lawyer in one of the documentaries who's very blunt, calls it a crime.
Right.
And yet you have these Shura council members who refuse to comment.
Yes.
And there's this sense of fear,
yeah,
among the general public about even expressing an opinion on it.
Right.
Even the editor-in-chief,
Yes.
who was close to Khashoggi, is very careful with his words.
Very much so.
He criticizes the lack of press freedom.
Right.
But he doesn't go so far as to directly blame MBS.
It's another example of that controlled freedom in action.
Yeah.
How much has truly changed when it comes to freedom of speech?
Right. And it's a good question.
It is.
And I think to really understand this, we need to go back and look at the history of this relationship between House of Saud and Wahhabism.
Absolutely. And one documentary actually takes us to Diriyah, which is, the birthplace of both the Saudi dynasty and that crucial alliance with Wahhabism back in the 18th century.
Oh, wow.
Really takes you back.
And they even visit the mosque of Sheikh Abdullah Wahhab, the founder of Wahhabism.
Yeah, I mean, this ultra-conservative doctrine really shaped Saudi Arabia's identity.
Yeah.
Emphasizing that strict adherence to Islamic law.
But it also, inspired extremist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS.
And the documentaries don't shy away from that connection at all.
They actually talk about that 1979 attack on Mecca by extremist elements within Saudi Arabia itself.
Pivotal moment. I mean, it led to a huge crackdown on dissent. But it also arguably set the stage for MBS's current attempts to promote this more moderate form of Islam.
So he's really trying to walk this tightrope.
He is.
Right, between modernizing the country and appeasing those conservative forces that still have a lot of power.
Right, and we see this play out in the curtailing of the religious police.
Right.
They were the enforcers of that really ultra-conservative interpretation of Islam.
Right.
And under MBS, their power has been significantly reduced.
But at the same time, Saudi Arabia is the custodian of Mecca and Medina.
Of course.
And they attract millions of pilgrims every year.
Right.
So that gives them a unique position of authority within the Muslim world.
So when MBS talks about this return to moderate Islam, we really have to ask ourselves, how genuine is this shift?
Especially when you consider the ongoing war in Yemen.
Yeah, the elephant in the room.
It's a brutal conflict.
It is.
It's barely acknowledged in all this pro-reform messaging. So, how can they claim to be this beacon of moderation while engaging in this devastating war?
It's a stark contradiction that really reveals those complexities of Saudi Arabia's reforms, right?
It's not a simple black and white situation.
No, there's a lot of gray.
Yeah, a lot of gray. And speaking of complexity, I think we have to talk about MBS's ambitious Vision 2030 plan.
Right. So this plan aims to transform the Saudi economy and society by 2030.
By 2030, wow.
With the goal of reducing their dependence on oil, becoming a global hub for innovation and technology.
It's almost like stepping into a science fiction movie.
It is, a little bit.
When you look at what they're doing, these futuristic megacities, investing heavily in renewable energy, pouring money into entertainment and tourism.
And they're going all in on some really mind-boggling projects like NEOM, this futuristic city they're building in the desert, supposed to be a showcase for sustainability, innovation, a completely different way of living.
They're even building this section called The Line.
Yeah, 170 kilometers long, a car-free city.
170 kilometers.
Designed to house 9 million people.
It's longer than the entire coastline of some countries.
It is.
And they even want to host part of the FIFA World Cup there in 2034.
So the scale's certainly ambitious. There's no doubt about that.
It's huge.
Some are skeptical, questioning the feasibility, pointing out the potential environmental impact.
Of course, yeah.
But MBS is clearly determined to make this happen.
Yeah, it's huge vision, and part of that vision involves Saudization.
Right, a policy aimed at replacing foreign workers with Saudi citizens.
Yeah, on the surface, it sounds like a good idea.
Right.
Create more opportunities for Saudis, reduce reliance on foreign labor.
Right, but the reality is far more complicated.
And these documentaries actually show us that human cost of this policy.
Yeah, we see foreign workers who've built their lives in Saudi Arabia suddenly facing deportation.
Yeah.
Often with little notice. I mean, the anxiety is palpable.
And it raises so many questions, right?
Yeah.
I mean, can they really replace all those foreign workers with Saudi citizens?
Yeah.
Will Saudis be willing to take on these jobs?
Yeah.
Many of which they see as undesirable.
Right. And what about the economic impact? Many of these workers send remittances back to their home countries.
Right.
Supporting families, contributing to their local economies.
Yeah.
What happens when that income stream dries up?
Yeah, it's a complex issue with these far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely.
And it's another example of how these reforms that seem positive on the surface can have these unintended negative impacts.
Yes, it really underscores the importance of looking beyond those, glossy pronouncements and examining the on-the-ground realities.
And it raises that question, whose interests are truly being served?
Exactly.
Speaking of whose interests are being served, we have to talk about NEOM.
Of course, NEOM, right? Yeah. That futuristic megacity that keeps popping up.
In these videos, yeah.
It is a cornerstone of Vision 2030, this symbol of MBS's ambition to really transform Saudi Arabia into this global hub for technology and innovation. I mean, they're talking about smart homes, flying taxis, even artificial rain.
It's like science fiction, right?
It is.
And then there's the line, this 170-kilometer-long car-free city that's supposed to house 9 million people.
The scale is just, it's mind-boggling.
It's huge, right?
And it raises a lot of questions about feasibility.
Yeah.
Can they really build something this massive in the middle of the desert? What about the environmental impact?
Right.
Some critics are arguing that NEOM is just a vanity project.
Oh, wow.
A way for MBS to project this image of progress and modernity while ignoring some of the more pressing issues facing the country.
So it's a bold gamble, right?
Absolutely.
Only time will tell if it pays off.
Yeah.
But NEOM is just one piece of this larger puzzle.
Right.
And we can't really talk about Saudi Arabia without acknowledging the enduring influence of the royal family, the House of Saud.
And one of the documentaries takes us to Diriyah, the birthplace of the Saudi dynasty.
Right.
And we see these ancient mud brick palaces where it all began.
Wow.
A reminder of their long and powerful lineage.
Yeah. And it's also the birthplace of that crucial alliance between the House of Saud and the Wahhabi religious establishment back in the 18th century.
Absolutely. And that pact continues to shape Saudi Arabia today.
Yeah. So that historical connection between political power and religious authority is key to understanding how this country operates.
Absolutely.
And it's something that MBS is clearly navigating very carefully.
Very carefully.
As he pushes for all these reforms.
He's trying to modernize the country while still maintaining the support of that religious establishment, which is no easy feat.
No, not at all. And it becomes even more complicated when you consider that Saudi Arabia is the custodian,
of course,
of the two holiest sites in Islam, Mecca and Medina.
Millions of Muslims from all over the world.
I mean, it's just...
make the pilgrimage to Mecca each year.
It's unbelievable. And the documentaries really capture that intensity, the grandeur of that experience.
It's a powerful reminder of the religious authority that Saudi Arabia holds, not just within its own borders, but throughout the Muslim world.
It's really a powerful thing to see.
And that authority comes with a lot of responsibility.
So when MBS talks about promoting a more moderate form of Islam, it carries a lot of weight.
It does.
But then you have the war in Yemen.
Right. It's that reminder that actions speak louder than words.
And it highlights the challenge of balancing these competing forces within Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
The desire for progress, the openness, the weight of tradition, the religious authority, and the ambition of a young leader who's determined to leave his mark.
Absolutely.
On the world.
It's a fascinating, complex story, and one that unfolds with each layer we peel back.
Yeah, and one that keeps evolving.
It does, with more questions than answers.
Always more questions than answers, and that's what we'll be exploring further in the next part of this deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
This whole theme of controlled freedom, it really comes into focus when we look at the social scene in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to see how people are navigating these changing social norms.
Absolutely. And one documentary actually takes us on this night out in Riyadh with these two young women.
Okay.
And their idea of fun might surprise you.
It's not quite what we picture when we think of nightlife.
No.
No clubs or bars. It's more about the malls and the cafes.
Right. Their evening revolves around malls, cafes, restaurants.
Yeah.
But even that is a huge change from how things used to be.
Right.
For decades, strict gender segregation meant that unrelated men and women just couldn't be seen socializing in public.
Right.
So to see these mixed groups hanging out, chatting, laughing, I mean, that is significant.
Yeah.
It shows those social norms are changing.
Right.
Albeit gradually. Yeah.
And within certain boundaries.
And it's not just the the lack of gender segregation. I mean, there's Western pop music playing everywhere.
Exactly. You don't hear that traditional Arabic music in these places.
Huh.
It really shows the influence of global culture, particularly on that younger generation.
Right.
I mean, they are consuming the same music, watching the same shows, engaging with the same online content as their peers around the world.
It kind of challenges that image, doesn't it?
It does.
Saudi Arabia as this closed-off society.
Yeah.
Even in a country with, such strict social norms.
Right.
Those global forces are still at play.
They are, and MBS is keenly aware of that.
Right.
His Vision 2030 plan isn't just about economic diversification. It's about reshaping Saudi society.
Yeah.
He wants to project this image of a modern, dynamic, globally integrated nation.
But while he's encouraging these changes, he's also, maintaining a tight control.
Oh, absolutely.
It's this delicate balancing act. It is.
And it makes you wonder, are these changes really taking root?
Yeah.
Or is it just superficial?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
Is this genuine social progress?
Right.
Or is this a very carefully curated performance?
And that question applies to MBS's economic plans, too.
Yes.
Especially when you consider those potential consequences for the millions of foreign workers who make up such a huge part of the Saudi workforce.
Yeah. Vision 2030 includes this policy called Saudization.
Right.
Which aims to replace those foreign workers.
With Saudi citizens.
With Saudi citizens.
Now, on the surface, it seems like a reasonable goal.
Right.
Right. Create more jobs for Saudis, reduce their reliance on foreign labor.
Of course.
But these documentaries show us the human cost.
The human cost of this policy. Yeah.
We see these workers.
Many of whom have built their lives in Saudi Arabia.
Right.
Suddenly facing deportation, often with little notice.
And it's unsettling to see that anxiety.
The uncertainty as they're being pushed out.
It raises a lot of questions.
It does.
Can they really replace all of these workers with Saudis? Will Saudis even be willing to take on these jobs?
Right.
Many of which are, seen as undesirable.
Yeah.
And then what about that economic impact? I mean, many of these workers send remittances back to their home countries.
Right.
Supporting families, contributing to their local economies.
Right.
What happens when that income stream dries up?
It's a complex issue.
It is, very much so.
With these really far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely.
And it's another example of how, you have these reforms.
That seem positive on the surface.
That seem positive, but then they have these unintended negative impacts.
Yes, it underscores the importance of looking beyond those glossy pronouncements.
Right.
And examining those on-the-ground realities.
And it raises the question, again,
of whose interests are truly being served.
Whose interests are being served.
By these reforms. Speaking of whose interests are being served, we got to talk about NEOM.
Of course, NEOM.
This futuristic megacity that keeps popping up.
Right, in these videos, yeah.
It's a cornerstone of Vision 2030.
It is.
A symbol of MBS's ambition to transform Saudi Arabia into this global hub for technology and innovation.
Yeah, they're talking about smart homes, flying taxis, even artificial rain.
It's like stepping into a science fiction film.
It really is.
And then there's the line, this 170-kilometer-long car-free city that's supposed to house 9 million people.
I mean, the scale is just mind-boggling.
It's huge.
And it raises all those questions about its feasibility, right?
Yeah.
Can they really build something this massive in the middle of the desert? And what about that environmental impact?
And some critics are actually arguing that NEOM is just a vanity project.
Yeah, a way for MBS to project this image of progress and modernity while ignoring some of the more pressing issues facing the country.
So it's a bold gamble.
It is.
Only time will tell if it pays off.
Yeah, but NEOM is just one piece of this larger puzzle.
Right, and we can't talk about Saudi Arabia without acknowledging that enduring influence of the royal family.
The House of Saud, right, one of the documentaries takes us to Diriyah, which is the birthplace of the Saudi dynasty.
Okay.
And you see these ancient mud brick palaces where it all began.
Wow.
A reminder of their long and powerful lineage.
Yeah, and it's also the birthplace of that crucial alliance between the House of Saud and the Wahhabi religious establishment.
Back in the 18th century.
Yeah.
And that pact continues to shape Saudi Arabia today.
So that historical connection between political power and religious authority.
It's key to understanding how Saudi Arabia operates.
It's so important to understand that.
Absolutely.
And it's something that MBS is navigating very carefully.
Very carefully.
As he pushes for these reforms.
He's trying to modernize the country.
Right.
While maintaining that support of the religious establishment.
Which is not an easy thing to do.
No, it's a very delicate balancing act.
And it gets even more complicated when you consider that Saudi Arabia is the custodian of the two holiest sites in Islam.
Mecca and Medina, right?
Millions of Muslims from all over the world make that pilgrimage to Mecca every year.
Every year.
And the documentaries really capture that intensity and grandeur of that experience.
It's a powerful reminder of that religious authority that Saudi Arabia wields.
It is.
Not just within its own borders, but throughout the Muslim world.
And that authority comes with a lot of responsibility.
A lot of responsibility.
So when MBS talks about promoting a more moderate form of Islam, it carries a lot of weight.
It does. But then you have the war in Yemen.
Right.
Which is a stark reminder that actions speak louder than words.
Yeah. Yeah, and it highlights the challenge
of balancing those competing forces within Saudi Arabia.
Right. I mean, you have the desire for progress and openness.
You have the weight of tradition and religious authority.
And you have the ambition of a young leader who's trying to reshape the country in his image.
It's a fascinating and complex story.
It really is.
And one that unfolds with each layer that we peel back.
Yeah, and it's a story that continues to evolve.
Absolutely.
Leaving us with more questions than answers.
It does. It does.
Wow, we've really covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
Exploring the complexities of modern-day Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, it's clear that this nation is at a crossroads.
Yeah.
Balancing tradition and ambition, religion, and reform.
It really is.
I mean, these documentaries have really taken us beyond those headlines, revealing those nuances of life in a country that's often misunderstood, I think.
The thing that really struck me was that contrast. Between those glossy images of futuristic megacities and then the lived experiences.
Of everyday Saudis,
It really does raise that question.
It does.
Are these reforms genuinely transforming Saudi Arabia? Or is this just a carefully constructed facade?
Yeah, and one thing that really stood out to me was how MBS, the Crown Prince, is really using Vision 2030 to not just reshape the economy, but to really rebrand the nation itself.
Yeah, he wants to project this image of Saudi Arabia as this modern, dynamic player on the world stage.
A hub for innovation and technology.
And he's using those social reforms as part of that.
Absolutely.
I mean, the lifting of the driving ban for women, that's a powerful symbol.
It is a powerful symbol of that shift.
Yeah.
But it also highlights that ongoing struggle for women's rights.
Right. And we saw how, Farah, the young woman who was featured in one of those documentaries, she was so excited about driving. But she was also really cautious.
Yeah, very much so.
Aware of those limits. And then you have the arrest of those women activists who actually campaigned for the driving ban.
It shows just how quickly things can change.
It does.
How those freedoms can be revoked.
It's that reminder that progress, it's not always linear.
No, it's not.
It comes with risk.
And setbacks, for sure.
Yeah. And what about those grand technological ambitions?
Right.
Like NEOM.
I mean, it's hard not to be awestruck by the scale of these projects.
It's huge.
But the documentary has also revealed a lot of skepticism about their feasibility, the potential environmental impact.
Some experts are actually saying that NEOM is just a vanity project.
Yeah, a way for MBS to project this image of progress without really addressing those underlying social and political challenges.
It makes you wonder if it's sustainable in the long run.
In the long run.
Especially when you consider, the economic realities
of the country.
Facing the country.
Yeah. And we can't forget about the shadow cast by the murder of Jamal Khashoggi.
Right. It's a constant reminder.
A stark reminder of the limits on freedom of speech, on dissent.
Even amidst all this talk of reform.
All this talk of reform.
I think these documentaries really do a good job of highlighting those competing forces.
They do.
Right, within Saudi Arabia.
That desire for progress, the weight of tradition.
The influence of religion, and then you have this ambition of this young leader who's trying to reshape the country.
Absolutely.
So where do we land after this deep dive?
It's clear that Saudi Arabia is a nation in flux.
Yeah.
Grappling with its identity on a global stage.
While the circus may appear to be changing, there are still many layers of contradiction and control.
It remains to be seen whether these reforms will lead to that genuine societal transformation, or if they're primarily a means of maintaining the power of the ruling elite.
These YouTube videos have given us a glimpse into those complexities.
They have.
And it's really up to each of us, I think, to form our own conclusions.
But one thing is for certain, Saudi Arabia is a country worth watching.
Absolutely.
A nation whose choices will have ripple effects far beyond its borders.
Well, that wraps up this deep dive into modern-day Saudi Arabia.
It does.
We hope you found this journey as fascinating and thought-provoking as we have.
We have.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.